Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you're all well. So this one is a little bit different. It's not about politics. It's not about society. Although actually both those things can come into it indirectly. I'm talking about cinema. I'm talking about film, which I love. I personally own around 1,000 DVDs. No exaggeration, about 1,000. Go to the cinema on average at least twice a month. No, I can't go all the time because, it's expensive. Although actually the Empire chain is more affordable than others, I've come to realize. One thing annoys me, they don't bother putting the prices on the website, and there is slight differences depending on the picture. But other than that, they are more affordable than other cinema chains. For example, a less high profile production is 5.99, and big Hollywood films like blockbusters are 7.99, which is actually I've discovered cheaper than other cinema chains. So I've muted some of my critique about the rising costs. Anyway, what I want to talk about is why taste in film is something that is overlooked. This idea of personal taste. It is entirely subjective. I mean, that sounds like an obvious statement, but I think it needs to be reiterated. I mean, very much like music, this is not something that it's not a question of right or wrong. Someone's personal taste is their personal taste, and you can't say their taste is wrong. Now, if they're saying something that is factually inaccurate about a particular film, that's a different matter. But it strikes me that a lot of people get passionate about this without really. I suppose you could extend it to other areas, music definitely, sports as well. As a boxing fan, I see this all the time in boxing circles when people passionately debate over a particular fighter and fights and records and legacy and all that. Um, you know, what I would say is life is short. I'm not going to say don't take it too seriously in the sense that someone, they shouldn't take it too seriously because ultimately it's entertainment. But I understand, if someone's in the film industry or, it's something they devote their livelihood to, like if they're a film student and they're devoting all their time to it, I can understand them having strong views on it. But still, it's unfortunate that people take it so personally, and they can't argue their case about a particular film without insulting others. Like, well, if you don't see this as a masterpiece, you're an idiot. Um, this is particularly noticeable about high-profile films or famous films: Citizen Kane, Star Wars, The Godfather, Titanic, Pulp Fiction. Some of those in particular, I would suggest definitely The Godfather and Citizen Kane. They seem to attract very passionate sort of defenses. But if someone says a particular film, let's say, just for the sake of argument, let's say a young person, 2023, watch Citizen Kane and say, "Oh, sorry, I find that boring." You might get film students and critics saying, "Oh, you're an idiot. It's the greatest film ever made." I personally don't think it is, but that's what I'm talking about. Now, the critic of the film student may understand why it's a great film. They may argue it's pioneering and so on. Um, but just because someone finds it boring doesn't mean that their taste is wrong. That's something that you can't, it's such a personal thing. You can't say it's right or wrong. I'm not saying they're right either, but that's the point. It's not a question of right or wrong. Now, if they say it's overrated, that's a slightly different area because overrated gets into the realm of what defines a great film. But again, I suppose you could say it's overrated to them. Doesn't mean it's overrated. By the way, since I mentioned Citizen Kane, I've watched that film about 3 times now. I'm personally not that taken in by it. I think it's a bit overhyped. I mean, I'm not a film student. I love film and I think I have a reasonable knowledge about the film industry, but every time this film's brought up, the argument is it's pioneering. but no one really explains why. I genuinely would like to know why. I personally think it's a good film. It's a watchable film, but I don't think it's that riveting. I don't think it certainly didn't blow me away, and it's not because of its age. I would say, for example, The Third Man, which is another film from the 40s, holds up just as well, but it's not quite as highly acclaimed as Citizen Kane. The Godfather again. I've watched The Godfather. It's a great film, but I think it's slightly overhyped. I've seen other mob films that are just as good as The Godfather, or at least, people might say, well, The Godfather, damn screen is flickering. People might say The Godfather popularized the franchise. Okay, so that's why it's big. But being pioneering in itself, again, that doesn't get into the question of taste. It's a bit like I would make this observation about the originality of films. And by the way, before anyone jumps to conclusions, I recognize Citizen Kane and The Godfather both as great films, but personally, put it this way, okay, let me angle it this way. If there's a fire and I have 50 DVDs to save, they would not be the first ones I grab. I'd probably grab Titanic and some of my other favorite films, but neither of those films would make it to my top 20 personal favorite films. That's not the same as saying I don't think that they're worthy films. They're just it's personal taste. Um, anyway, I went a bit left field there. I was talking about, when you have an original film, for example, Rocky, as opposed to the sequels, Ghostbusters, as opposed to the sequels, people will always, for some reason, there's this idea that the first must be the best. I don't entirely go with that. I would cite, for example, I actually think Ghostbusters 2 was better than the original. I thought it was funnier. There were more ghosts. And the point is, it's meant to be a wacky film. It's meant to be outlandish comedy horror. So, people might say, oh, but more ghosts, that's artificial. Yeah, but it's entertaining. I just find Ghostbusters 2 more entertaining than Ghostbusters 1. I think Carpathian was a much better villain than that Sumerian. I forget the name now, but another example is Addams Family Values, 1993. To me, that's a much better film than the first Addams Family, which was okay. But that second one, Addams Family Values, I think Joan Cusack was great as Debbie Jelinski. So, and as for the Rocky series, I think all the films are great, but I don't agree Rocky's the best just because it initiated the whole thing. I think Rocky Four is the best. Um, so this argument of it's the first, so it must be the best. Why? Who's where does that come from? I think it's the idea. Well, without it, the others wouldn't exist, and that's true. But that doesn't mean it has to be the most gripping or the most. Things can improve. Second time around or third time around. Not always. Sometimes sequels certainly don't measure up. And remakes don't always measure up either. Sometimes you get good remakes. But what I would say is there's not really a golden rule on these things. It's not one size fits all. Um, anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. But yeah, I just wish people would be a little bit, I don't know, less blowhard about it. It's the same with music. I personally think Titanic's the greatest film ever made. I totally appreciate not everyone would agree with that. Some people would say, no, it's Citizen Kane, or no, it's The Godfather, or no, it's what other films are often named. A lot of people hold Pulp Fiction very highly. I think Pulp Fiction's a notable film. I think it, it's it's a quirky film. It has some good one-liners. I don't think the plot is that great. Um, uh, so it's another one I think like everyone raves about it. I think it's good, it's watchable, and I get some of the praise that goes its way, but I think it's a little overhyped. And again, when this issue is brought up, people always say, "Oh, but you're ignoring how pioneering it was." Well, thing about film is it's always been about mass entertainment, right? So no matter how well a film is made, and I'm not saying this is the case with the films I've named, but no matter how well a film is made, if it doesn't appeal to the mass audience, then Not going to be really considered in the same way as something that is. I think the reason the Marvel films have done so well in the 21st century, and I'm really not into them at all, but they do seem to utterly dominate the film industry nowadays. But I think the reason for that is because probably I would imagine the characters have become familiar, very impressive CGI, and I'm not always a fan of CGI, but clearly those films shouldn't spend millions and millions on it. And that's probably the reason. But to me, I kind of agree with Martin Scorsese on that. Well, maybe not quite the way he put it. It's not real film, but I do think it's too dominant. And I like traditional film where you just have actors involved in strong acting, good storylines, and that sort of film. I appreciate that, and I hope it never dies. I think CGI and special effects have their place, but I think there could be over reliance on them as well. If you have a film where the story is good and the acting is great, there doesn't necessarily need to be a lot of action or special effects. It can still be a gripping film. And I think I'm coming from a point here of I have a very eclectic taste personally. I can appreciate a lot of different films. Like really, one day I could be watching, I don't know, Schindler's List, and the next day I could be watching Gremlins, that sort of range. Or the next day I could be watching one of the Three Colors trilogy, which were French films in the 90s. So my taste is very eclectic. I could appreciate a lot of different things. Um, but I won't sort of think, well, this critic has said the film's great, so their word is gospel. They can make an eloquent case of why the film is great and what they saw in it. Film student can do the same thing, and they'll argue about the frames that were used or the camera angles and all that sort of thing. The truth is, most ordinary people who go to the cinema don't know about all that stuff. They just want to be entertained, right? And that's something that's overlooked. There's a bit of snobbery, I think, from some film critics and film students, whereby they sort of think, well, I've studied the industry, so my opinion's more valid. No, it's not. Just a personal opinion. You can maybe make a strong argument because of the knowledge that you have about the industry, but that doesn't relate to personal taste. It just doesn't. You either like something or you don't. Um, Talking of critics, I quite like Mark Kermode. I find myself in agreement with quite a lot of his reviews, but I wouldn't take any critic's word as gospel. Um, and I'm not sure why people do, because it's ultimately their opinion. Right, I'm going to wrap this up. I sometimes do film reviews on this channel. It's been a while since I've done that, but I hope that I don't come across as bombastic. And I always try to pitch it as it's my opinion rather than I'm right and you have to enjoy this. I think people just need to make their case about a particular film that they like and maybe why it's so good rather than just calling people idiots. So, yeah, I think that should be the thing. So someone saying they're not enamored by a film or they've watched it this many times and they just don't get the hype, that's taste. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. Maybe you can't see where they're coming from. Maybe you think that their views are misplaced. But as long as they're not saying anything that's factually wrong, then it is personal taste. Let me know your thoughts. Oh, one last thing. Probably being a film critic, a top film critic, can be quite lucrative. So I don't want to be a hypocrite here. I wouldn't totally rule it out myself, but I'd like to do it with the caveat that it's my opinion and I'd make an eloquent case as to why this is good. But it's what I like about Mark Kermode. He's not arrogant. He just argues why he likes something and he doesn't say he's right. He just said, opinion. Um, some film students could learn that. Okay, thanks for watching.